One thing I've been hearing from my listeners here in Montana is, hey, is there any chance you can chat with this congressman out of Kentucky? Can you get a hold of Representative Thomas Massie out of Kentucky? He's got a bill known as the Prime Act. And, one of the questions we've been talking about here on Montana Talks is, hey, why are the meat packers getting high prices for the beef, but we ranchers aren't getting higher prices for our cows? That's a question that we've been hearing a lot here in Montana, but especially during the COVID-19 shutdowns when fresh beef was disappearing from grocery store shelves due to consumer demand. Well, is there one piece of legislation that would free ranchers up from being so reliant on the big meat packing companies? Could the Prime Act help, and what's it all about? Representative Thomas Massie now with us here on Montana Talks. Congressman, great to have you on the show this morning.
Hey, thanks for having me on. First, I want to give a shout-out to your Senator, Steve Daines. He's a co-sponsor of the Prime Act in the Senate. And the Prime Act stands for Processor Revival Intrastate Meat Exemption Act. So and I've introduced this, I think this is the third Congress that I introduced it. But this Congress, we picked up a lot of momentum. We have 51 sponsors in the House, and I think about 9 sponsors in the Senate right now for this bill. What it does is it gives ranchers and farmers the ability to sell directly to the consumer using a local processor. And I think this is important, and the importance of it has been recognized now because some of the problems with our meat processing industry have been exposed due to COVID. We had shortages in supermarkets, we had rationing, and we still got higher prices in the supermarkets, while at the same time, farmers are seeing lower prices for their cattle. And that's because 4 companies, 2 of them are wholly owned foreign entities, 4 companies control 85% of the meat processing in this country. What the Prime Act does is it allows farmers to use these mom and pop shops and sell directly to consumers.
Now, of course, one of the biggest questions, though, is how do we ensure safety? Because that's one thing that really is a hallmark of our American beef. It's the reliability, it's the safety, and I know for a lot of ranchers, they want to ensure, okay, if we're going to make any changes here, let's make sure there's not any unintended consequences. Congressman Massie, talk about the safety standpoint and how this bill would try to ensure that there's still a safety component with our beef supply.
That's a great question, and I get that a lot. Can we guarantee that the meat that's produced under the Prime Act and sold to consumers is safe? What I point out is that every recall that's ever happened has come from a USDA facility. There's not really a guarantee of safety there when you have a USDA inspector full-time. Now, the local processors, they're still going to be subject to any state laws that might apply. And here in Kentucky, they have to be inspected by the local health department, the county health department, just like a restaurant would be. So it's not like this is going to be some room that nobody ever goes in to see. In fact, the local processors that I use here in Kentucky, the consumer can open the door. They'll open the door and let you look in the back and see how the sausage gets made, so to speak, which is more than Congress will do, by the way.
Yeah, that's true.
But then the other thing is there's currently an exemption that allows farmers and ranchers to sell directly to consumers, and that exemption is that the U.S. government says that if it's your own animal, you can have it processed anywhere you want, and it doesn't have to be a USDA facility. So what a lot of farmers do is they will sell a whole animal or a half or a quarter of an animal to a family who will ostensibly take ownership of the live animal. Now, they may never see the live animal because it's delivered directly to the processor. But the new owner, which is going to be the consumer, buys a share of that animal and then has it processed and then consumes it at their house. Nobody, to my knowledge, has ever gotten sick using that loophole.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of us in
reasons-
Montana do.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got aunt and uncle and cousins that are great ranchers in eastern Montana, and the best beef I get is when it comes straight from their ranch. So the question is, why don't we do that on a bigger scale, allowing Montana ranchers to be able to market more of their Montana beef straight to the consumers? We also want to see, hey, why don't we get a meat packing plant here in Montana? How would the Prime Act help on both of those fronts?
Well, that's a great question. So just to summarize, my bill would make it easier for farmers to market directly to consumers because now you can sell them a steak or a package of a hamburger instead of having to sell them a half of an animal. A lot of families can't afford to buy half of an animal. Now, this would incentivize more people to go into business. I've had people who were processors who went out of business or who process only at certain times of the year, like during hunting season here in Kentucky. They say, within 5 weeks, I could be up to full speed, and I would do it if the Prime Act passes. There's been some discussion in Congress about, well, what if we just make the Prime Act temporary? Let's just do a pilot program. And my answer to that is that will not work because anybody who's going to go into the business of processing has to buy equipment, they've got to get the space, they've got to hire employees, and there's still going to be regulations they have to comply with. They're not going to do all that if they know the rug can be pulled out from under them 6 months from now. So they need the certainty of a permanent law, not just like some temporary exemption from the USDA or some pilot program passed by Congress.
And that's interesting too, because we know that there's a shortage of capacity in the workforce for meat processors right now. So you might say, well, wait a minute, you're going to add more demand on the meat processors out there while they're already facing a shortage of workforce. But actually that will stimulate more, that will incentivize people getting into the workforce because you'll have a steady stream of business. Yeah.
And by the way, part of the workforce problem at the large meat processing facilities is actually a COVID problem where they have contracted the virus. And you don't see that at the small processing facilities. They're not hotbeds of virus outbreaks. It's only at the large facilities. So I think it's safer for the employee at the smaller facilities. Back on the safety thing, when you buy from a farmer, you're buying meat from one animal. When you buy it from one of the big four meat processors and then it comes through the grocery store, not only do you not know which farm that animal came from or even which processor prepared it, in a lot of cases the supermarket's not going to tell you. You don't know how many animals are in that package of hamburger.